sit with this for a moment before you do anything else. Somewhere tonight, a person with almost nothing in their pocket is about to make one decision that will quietly separate the rest of their life from the life they were living an hour ago. No one will see it happen. There will be no applause, no witnesses, no proof until years later. And the strange part is this: it was never about the money he didn't have. It was about the one choice he made anyway. You have had a night like this too, whether you noticed it or not. A night where something in you was being asked to decide, and you either answered or you didn't. Most people never realize which nights those were until long after they've passed, looking back and thinking, that was the one, that was the hinge, and I almost missed it. Tonight might be another one of those nights. You cannot always tell in the moment. That is what makes it so easy to walk past. There is a strange comfort people take in believing that the poorest person in any room is simply unlucky or behind, or waiting for a break that has not yet arrived. It lets everyone else off the hook. It means nothing has to change tonight. But if you have ever actually watched what happens to a person who is quietly, deliberately deciding something different from what their circumstances suggest, you already know that luck was never really the variable. What you decide in the next few minutes of stillness may matter more than anything you decide next year, because next year's decisions will simply be an echo of this one. There is an old law that has quietly outlived every generation that doubted it. The poorest person in the room is never poor because of what is in their hands. They are poor, if they are poor at all, because of what they have already decided is true about themselves before the day even begins. Money follows decision. It has never once followed circumstance. Circumstance only reveals what a person has already agreed to believe. This is not a comforting saying meant to soften hardship. It is closer to a mechanism, the same way a lock only opens for the correct shape of key. The world does not ask whether you have money. It asks whether you have made a decision it can work with. A decision, once truly made, not wished for, not hoped for, but made the way a door is closed, begins to organize the small facts of a life around itself. It does not happen instantly. It happens the way water finds a crack in stone, slowly, without announcement, until one day the stone is different. Most people confuse a decision with a preference. A preference says, I would like things to be different. A decision says, things are already different, and now I simply have to live my way into the proof of it. The gap between those two is where most lives quietly stall for years, sometimes for a lifetime. A person can want a better circumstance with real sincerity and still never decide, because deciding requires closing every other door, including the comfortable one marked maybe later. The poorest man in any room is rarely the one with the least money. He is more often the one still holding every door open, waiting for certainty to arrive before he is willing to choose. Certainty, though, has never once arrived first. It always arrives after, as a kind of reward for the decision that came before it, never as a condition for it. This is why two people can stand in the same empty room, facing the same empty bank account, reading the same bad news, and only one of them walks out changed. The room did not choose. The circumstance did not choose. The decision did, and it was available to both of them in equal measure. I decide first. I let the evidence arrive after Daniel had been a mechanic for 11 years, and for most of them he was good at his job and bad at his own life, in the quiet way a lot of capable people are. The shop he worked at outside a mid-sized town was the kind of place with a coffee machine that never worked, and a boss who paid on time but never a cent more than he had to. Daniel's rent had gone up twice in 2 years. His truck, the one he needed to get to work, needed brakes he could not afford. So he drove carefully, the way you drive when you are quietly negotiating with your own vehicle to hold together one more month. He had $83 in his checking account the week this happened, and he remembered the exact number because he had checked it standing in the shop bathroom during his break, the way people check bad news twice, hoping it will read differently. His daughter needed new shoes for school, a small thing, the kind of small thing that becomes enormous at $83. He had already decided quietly, weeks earlier, that this was simply what his life looked like now, and would likely keep looking like. He did not say this out loud to anyone. He did not think of it as giving up. He thought of it as being realistic, which is often the exact same decision wearing a more respectable name. That same week, an older man came into the shop with a transmission problem in a car that clearly cost more than Daniel would earn in 2 years. The man was polite, unhurried, the kind of calm that Daniel noticed but couldn't yet name. While they waited for a part, the man asked Daniel, almost as small talk, what he wanted his life to look like in 5 years. Daniel gave the answer people give when they haven't actually thought about it. Something vague about getting ahead and not worrying so much. The older man nodded and said something simple, almost too simple, that most people don't have a money problem, they have a decision problem. and that the two feel identical from the inside but are not the same thing at all. Daniel thought about that sentence for 3 days without meaning to. It kept surfacing while he was under a car, while he was eating lunch alone in the break room, while he was lying awake doing math that never worked out. He began to notice that every time an opportunity had come near him in the last few years, a chance to take an extra certification, a customer who'd offered to recommend him to a specialty garage, a cousin who'd floated the idea of starting a small mobile repair service together, he had quietly talked himself out of it before anyone else had the chance to. Not because the ideas were bad, but because somewhere earlier he had made an invisible decision that he was a person things simply didn't work out for. He had never said it aloud. He had just lived like it was true, the way a person can carry an old verdict about themselves for years without ever once cross-examining it. He started asking himself, in the quiet moments the job gave him, a smaller and less dramatic question than "How do I get rich?" He asked instead, "What is the next honest door in front of me? And have I actually decided to walk through it, or have I just been circling it?" The question embarrassed him a little the first few times, because the honest answer was that he had been circling almost everything for years. So he made a different decision, and it was smaller than it sounds. He decided that starting that week, he would treat every opportunity that reached him as something meant to be taken seriously, not something to be quietly declined out of habit. He signed up for the mobile diesel certification he'd been putting off for 2 years, paying for it in 3 installments he genuinely could not comfortably afford, the kind of expense that keeps a person awake doing arithmetic at midnight. He called his cousin back and said yes to the mobile repair idea, on weekends only, no big promises, just to start with a borrowed toolbox and 2 regular customers. He kept working the same job, drove the same truck with the same worn brakes, and told no one that anything inside him had shifted, because nothing visible had yet. For the first 2 months, the extra weekend work barely covered the certification payments, and there were nights he wondered whether he had simply traded one kind of tired for another. He did not get rich. He got instead 3 new clients by referral, then a 4th, then enough steady weekend work that he financed a small used van once his truck could no longer carry the equipment. The brakes finally got fixed. A year in, Daniel was still not wealthy by any outside measure a stranger would recognize, but the $83 had become a modest cushion, then a real one, and more than that, Daniel had become someone who said yes to a door instead of walking past it and quietly calling that caution. His daughter got her shoes without the arithmetic. The outcome was ordinary. The decision behind it was not. There is a kind of poverty that has nothing to do with a bank statement, and a kind of quiet wealth that has nothing to do with a number either. It shows itself most clearly in stillness, not in the moment of the decision itself, but in the moments after, when nothing outward has changed yet and a person has to simply trust that something real has shifted anyway. This is the part almost no one talks about because it isn't dramatic. It looks like sitting in an ordinary room in ordinary silence, having made a decision no one witnessed, and choosing to believe it was real before there is a single piece of evidence to confirm it. Faith, in its oldest and least complicated sense, is simply this: acting from a decision before the world has agreed to reward it. It is not blind hope. It is closer to a kind of quiet obedience to something in yourself you have finally decided to trust more than your fear. An unseen order does not respond to noise or urgency. It has never once been rushed by a person's panic, and it has never once ignored a person's genuine stillness. It responds to the settled certainty of someone who has stopped negotiating with their own doubt, the way a held breath finally releases once a decision is made and there is nothing left to argue about. This is available to anyone, regardless of what they call their higher power or whether they call it anything at all. You do not need the correct words for it. You need only the willingness to sit in the quiet after the decision and let it be true before it has proven itself. Gratitude plays a stranger role in this than most people expect. It is not simply good manners toward whatever gave you your circumstances. It is closer to a signal sent inward that says, "I already trust this is working, even before I can see it working." People who make real decisions and then wait in anxious grasping rarely get to see those decisions bear fruit, not because the decision was wrong, but because the grasping itself keeps interrupting the stillness the decision needed to grow in. Stillness is the one language every tradition of prayer and reflection has always agreed on, long before they agreed on anything else. I am someone who makes decisions, not excuses. My circumstances do not get the final vote on my life. History remembers a man who, by any honest measure, spent the first half of his life failing. He lost his job. He failed in business and spent years repaying debts that were not entirely his own making, debts that followed him for what must have felt like an impossibly long time to a man with little else to his name. He ran for office and lost, more than once, in ways that would have quietly convinced most people to stop trying long before he did. He suffered the death of people close to him, and periods of what he himself described in his own letters as deep despair, the kind that makes ordinary daily tasks feel like an unreasonable request. By every outward measure available at the time, he was for long stretches one of the poorest and least successful men anyone around him could point to. He was not born to means, had little formal schooling, and clawed his way through self-taught reading by firelight to even qualify for the modest positions he later held. And yet something in him kept making the same quiet decision over and over, to try again, to serve again, to believe the effort mattered even when the results did not yet show it, and had shown the opposite so many times before. That man was Abraham Lincoln, and the country remembers him not for the years he failed, but for the one decision, repeated so many times across so many defeats that it eventually became simply who he was, to keep standing back up in rooms that had already written him off. He did not know, in the moment of any single failure, that history would one day remember the decision rather than the defeat. He simply kept deciding, one ordinary evening at a time, with no guarantee that any of it would add up to anything. That is the part available to anyone, in any room, with any amount of money in their pocket, not the outcome, which none of us can promise ourselves, but the decision to try again, which is entirely within reach every single time. There is an old teaching, told in different forms across many traditions, about a traveler who arrives at a village during a famine, carrying nothing but a small pot and a single stone. The villagers understandably tell him there is nothing to share. He asks only for water and a fire, and tells them he can make a rich stew from the stone alone, if only they will lend him a little of what they have, an onion here, a handful of grain there, a bit of salt someone swears they cannot spare but brings anyway. One by one, out of curiosity more than belief, each person contributes the small thing they were sure was too little to matter. By evening, the stew feeds the entire village, and there is more than enough. The stone, of course, did nothing on its own. It never claimed to. The decision to give something, however small, before there was any proof it would matter, that was the entire meal, hidden inside a story about a stone so that no one would feel foolish for having believed in something so plain. The lesson has never really been about scarcity, and it was never really about the stone at all. It has always been about the moment before anyone in that village was willing to move, and what happened the instant even one of them decided to. I trust the decision before I see the proof. What I have is enough to begin. None of this required Daniel, or the man in the old teaching, or anyone in that half-remembered village, to have more than they already had. It required only the willingness to stop waiting for a better circumstance to arrive before making the decision that circumstance was supposedly waiting on. That order has always been backwards, and it has always quietly cost people years they did not need to lose. If you have stayed with this quiet room a little further than most, there is more waiting below for the ones who are ready to keep going, at their own pace, when they are ready. I am not waiting for permission to begin. Somewhere tonight, someone with far less than you currently believe you need is about to make a decision that will look, from the outside, like nothing at all happened. No headline, no witness, no immediate proof. And in a year, in 5 years, they will look back and understand that the entire shape of their life turned quietly on that one ordinary evening, the one that looked at the time like every other evening before it. You do not need more than you have right now to begin. You never did. The $83 was never the obstacle, and neither is whatever number sits in your account tonight. You need only to decide, the way a door is closed, not a wish that drifts, not a hope that waits politely for permission. A decision does not ask the world if it is allowed. It simply begins quietly and lets the world catch up in its own time. Let tonight be the version of your life that the future quietly points back to. The ordinary evening no one else will ever know mattered except you. Whatever you decide in this stillness, decide it fully, and then let it rest. The way a seed is trusted to the ground without being dug up each morning to check on its progress. The room does not remember who was poorest. It never has. It only remembers who decided, and who let that decision stand before you go. Know that there is more here for you. Whenever you are ready to receive it, there will be no thunderclap tonight, no sudden reversal you can point to tomorrow morning and say, there, that was the moment. It will simply be a decision, made quietly in a room no different from any other room you have sat in 100 times before. That is what makes it so easy to miss, and that is exactly why it matters. The people who changed the shape of their lives were rarely the ones waiting for a sign large enough to be undeniable. They were the ones willing to decide before the sign ever came, and to let the sign arrive later, as confirmation rather than permission. Decide. Then let the stillness do the rest.